The quantum engines of the prison transport hummed their final notes as they powered down, leaving Commander Vex Nimra standing before the most controversial prisoner ever to grace Helio 7's detention center. Her iridescent scales shifted under the harsh lighting as she studied the human before her, searching for signs of the monster she'd been warned about. Marcus Cole stood in silence, his restraints glowing with psychic dampeners, a precaution that seemed almost laughable given his current state. His dark eyes held none of the savagery she'd expected from the so-called Butcher of New Venus. Instead, they reflected something far more dangerous: intelligence. "I expected someone taller," Vex said, her mandibles clicking with barely contained curiosity. The stories painted him as a giant, a demon who'd torn through Centaurian battle cruisers with his bare hands. The reality was far more mundane, a lean, medium-built human with graying temples and scarred hands. "Sorry to disappoint," Marcus replied, his voice carrying an unexpected warmth that made several guards tighten their grips on their weapons. "Though I seem to be doing a lot of that lately." Vex circled him slowly, her ceremonial armor catching the light. As Chief Warden of Helios 7, she'd housed everything from Plutonian war criminals to Martian terror cells, but this was different. This human had allegedly destroyed 3 Centaurian colonies, yet stood before her with the calm of a meditation instructor. "Officer Zena," she called to her second-in-command, a younger Centaurian whose scales still held their juvenile blue tint. "Begin full biometric scanning. I want to know everything: neural patterns, genetic markers, the works." "I could save you the trouble," Marcus offered. "I'm human." "Boringly so. No augments, no genetic engineering, just flesh and bone." Vex stopped in front of him, her height allowing her to look down at his face. "Flesh and bone don't vaporize shield generators, Prisoner Cole. You'd be surprised what flesh and bone can do when pushed far enough," he responded, something ancient and tired creeping into his voice. The scanning began, bathing Marcus in waves of purple light as machines whirred around him. Vex watched the readings with growing confusion. Everything was normal, extraordinarily normal. His neural patterns showed no signs of the rage they'd been told characterized his species. His genetic structure was pure human, without the weaponized modifications they'd been warned about. "Take him to containment level 0, she ordered, keeping her voice steady despite her growing unease. "Full isolation protocols." As the guards led Marcus away, he turned his head slightly. "Commander Nimra, you might want to ask yourself something. If everything you've heard about humans is true, why am I still allowing myself to be led away in chains?" The question lingered in the air long after he'd gone, like smoke from a fire that refused to die. Vex found herself standing alone in the processing chamber, her clawed hand absently tracing the ceremonial scars on her neck, marks of honor from battles against humans she now realized she'd never truly understood. "Officer Zena," she called, not turning around. "Access the Colonial Archives. I want every piece of footage we have from the New Venus incident. Every sensor log, every communication record." "Commander?" Zena's voice carried a note of concern. "Those files are sealed by High Command." "Then unseal them," Vex replied, her scales darkening with determination. "Something isn't right here, and I intend to find out what." That night, as Helio 7's artificial day cycle dimmed to simulate dusk, Vex stood in her private quarters, watching security feeds of Marcus's cell. He sat in perfect stillness, eyes closed, looking for all the world like he was exactly where he wanted to be. A notification chimed on her console: the first batch of archived files had been decoded. As she began to read, her eyes widened. The official reports claimed the New Venus colony had been destroyed by human weapons, but the sensor logs told a different story. The energy signatures didn't match any known human technology. In fact, they looked suspiciously like. A second chime interrupted her thoughts. "Commander," Zena's voice was tight with anxiety. "High Command is requesting an immediate update on the prisoner's status." Vex closed the files with a gesture, her mind racing. Tell them preliminary processing is still underway. Standard procedures must be followed to ensure maximum security. As she spoke, she watched Marcus on the monitor. He had opened his eyes and was looking directly at the camera, a faint smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Somehow, impossibly, he knew. He knew she'd start looking, start questioning. And suddenly Vex understood, the chains that truly needed breaking weren't the ones around Marcus Cole's wrists. They were the ones around her own mind, forged from years of propaganda and fear. The game was just beginning, and for the first time in her distinguished career, Commander Vex Nimra wasn't sure which side she was playing for. Commander Vex Nimra stood in the observation room of Interrogation Chamber Alpha, her scaled fingers drumming against the metallic surface of the control panel. The chamber's pale blue lights cast strange shadows across Marcus Cole's face as he sat, still maddeningly calm, at the steel table below. "Begin recording," she commanded, her voice carrying the weight of authority she'd spent decades perfecting. Prisoner interview, Day 3, subject, Marcus Cole, human, regarding the New Venus incident. She entered the chamber, the door sealing behind her with a soft hiss. Marcus watched her approach, his expression unchanged save for a slight raising of his eyebrows. "I was wondering when you'd start asking real questions." "The sensor logs," Vex said, placing a holopad on the table between them. "They don't match our official narrative. The energy signatures that destroyed New Venus, they're Centaurian." "And that bothers you," Marcus observed. It wasn't a question. Vex's scales rippled with barely contained frustration. 3 million colonists died that day. Our people blamed yours. We launched retaliatory strikes against Earth settlements. Started a war that's cost billions of lives. If we were wrong. If? Marcus leaned forward, his restraints humming. "Commander, you've already seen enough to know the truth. The question is, what are you going to do about it?" Before she could respond, Officer Zena's voice crackled through the intercom. "Commander, urgent transmission from High Command. Admiral Thorax requests immediate contact." Vex's heart rate quickened. They shouldn't be checking in again so soon. "Maintain position," she ordered Marcus, though they both knew the command was meaningless. He wasn't going anywhere. In her private office, the holographic form of Admiral Thorax materialized, all 8 feet of him, his battle-scarred scales and ceremonial armor designed to intimidate. "Commander Nimra. I understand you've been accessing restricted archives." "Standard prisoner assessment protocols, Admiral," she replied smoothly. "We need to understand the subject to contain him effectively." "The human is to be executed in 3 days, Thorax announced, his mandibles clicking with finality. "The trial has been moved forward. Evidence of his guilt is overwhelming. Admiral, with respect, new information has come to light that suggests." "That suggests nothing," Thorax cut her off, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "The human dies. Those are your orders. Do not make me question your loyalty, Commander. Not after everything you've accomplished." The transmission ended, leaving Vex alone with thoughts that felt increasingly like treason. She returned to the interrogation chamber, where Marcus sat exactly as she'd left him. "They're moving up your execution," she said without preamble. "Of course they are," he replied. "They're afraid of what you'll find if you keep digging." He studied her face. "Tell me, Commander, in all your years of service, how many other monsters have you put down without questioning why?" Vex slammed her hands on the table, scales flaring red with emotion. "You think this is easy? Everything I've believed, everything I've fought for, was built on lies," Marcus finished gently. "Trust me, I know how that feels. When I first discovered what really happened at New Venus, I wanted to deny it too. But the evidence was there. Your own people destroyed that colony to justify a war they'd already decided to start. They needed a monster, so they created one. Vex sank into the chair across from him, suddenly feeling the weight of every year she'd served. Why didn't you tell anyone? Marcus laughed, but there was no humor in it. I tried. Every human diplomatic channel, every neutral species embassy. But your government's propaganda machine was too effective. Everyone already knew what humans were capable of. It was easier to believe we were monsters than to accept that they'd been deceived. A soft chime indicated another presence at the door. Officer Xena entered, her young scales pale with anxiety. Commander, I've found something else in the archives. Security footage from New Venus, moments before the destruction. You need to see this. Vex activated the holopad, and a flickering image appeared between them. The footage showed Centaurian military vessels in orbit around New Venus, their weapons charging. But it was the transmission log that made her blood run cold, orders, directly from High Command, authorizing the colony's destruction. 3 million of your own people, Marcus said quietly. Sacrificed to start a war that would consolidate power for a select few. And I'm the monster? Vex stood abruptly, her decision crystallizing like ice. Officer Xena, initiate Protocol Shadow. Full communications blackout, all channels. Lock down the station. Commander? Xena's scales shifted in confusion. If we're going to expose the truth, we need time. And we need him alive. She gestured to Marcus's restraints, which deactivated with a soft click. The real question, Marcus Cole, is whether you're willing to help us prevent another colony from meeting New Venus's fate. Marcus stood, rubbing his wrists. I've spent 3 years in chains trying to prevent exactly that. But you should know, once we do this, there's no going back. Your career, your life as you know it, ended the moment I saw that footage, Vex finished. Some prices are worth paying for the truth. As alarms began blaring throughout Helios 7, warning of the unauthorized lockdown, Vex realized she'd never felt more certain of anything in her life. The monster she'd been sent to execute might just be the key to saving both their species from a war built on lies. And somewhere in the vast darkness of space, Admiral Thorax received word of Helios 7's communications blackout. His scales darkened with rage as he gave the order that would change everything: deploy the fleet. If Commander Nimra wants to protect her pet human, she'll learn what real monsters are capable of. Red emergency lights pulsed through the corridors of Helios 7 as Commander Vex Nimra, Marcus Cole, and Officer Xena raced through the station's restricted archives section. The lockdown had bought them time, but they all knew it wouldn't last long against a determined High Command. The central database should be through here, Vex said, her claws flying over a security panel. The massive doors slid open with a hydraulic hiss, revealing a chamber filled with quantum storage units. If there's evidence of other colonies marked for destruction, we'll find it here. Marcus moved to a terminal, his fingers dancing across the holographic interface. Your security protocols are impressive, but they're designed to keep outsiders out, not insiders in. He glanced at Vex. Good thing we have the Chief Warden's access codes. Xena stood guard at the entrance, her scales shifting nervously between colors. Commander, long-range sensors are detecting multiple ships dropping out of quantum space. Centaurian signatures. Thorax, Vex growled. He's not waiting for an explanation. She joined Marcus at the terminal, watching as he bypassed layers of encryption. How did you learn to hack Centaurian systems? I had 3 years in various prison cells to figure it out, he replied, not looking up. Amazing what you can learn when everyone assumes you're just a dumb human waiting to be executed. The screens around them suddenly blazed to life, displaying classified documents, tactical plans, and communication logs. What they revealed made even Vex's battle-hardened heart sink. It wasn't just New Venus, Marcus said quietly. They have a list. 12 more colonies marked for strategic pacification. Some Centaurian, some human, some belonging to neutral species. He turned to Vex. They're engineering a galactic war, using fear and prejudice to maintain control. A distant explosion rocked the station. Xena stumbled, catching herself against a wall. They're here. Multiple boarding parties detected on levels 12 through 15. Download everything, Vex ordered, her military training taking over. Xena, initiate emergency protocols. Release all non-violent prisoners to secondary holding. We need as much confusion as possible. What about the violent ones? Marcus asked. Vex's mandibles clicked in what might have been a grim smile. Let's not get desperate yet. She pulled up a station schematic. There's a quantum transmitter in the communication hub. If we can reach it, we can broadcast this evidence to every species in the sector. Another explosion, closer this time. The lights flickered, and the distant sound of weapons fire echoed through the corridors. Download complete, Marcus announced. But they'll have teams heading for the comm hub already. They know that's our only way out of this. Vex checked her pulse rifle's charge. Then we fight our way through. Xena, you've served with honor, but this next part. I can't order you to commit treason. The young officer stood straighter, her scales settling into a determined blue. With respect, Commander, following corrupt orders blindly isn't loyalty. It's cowardice. Marcus retrieved a weapon from a fallen security drone, checking its systems with practiced ease. Your people aren't the only ones who have legends, you know. On Earth, we had stories of warriors who stood against impossible odds because it was right. We called them heroes. Save the mythology lesson, Vex said, but her tone was warm. We need to move. The transmission has to be sent from the primary console, which means we're heading for the most obvious target on the station. They moved through the corridors like shadows, years of military training evident in every step. The sounds of battle grew closer, shouts, energy weapons, the clash of armor against metal. Commander, Xena whispered urgently, checking her datapad. They've taken control of levels 10 through 18. They're pushing toward the central hub from multiple directions. Then we'll give them something else to think about. Vex accessed a control panel, her claws moving with precise purpose. Initiating containment breach in detention block C. Marcus raised an eyebrow. I thought we weren't getting desperate. Plans change, she replied. Sometimes you need a bigger distraction. The station's AI announced containment breaches across multiple levels, and chaos erupted. Security teams were forced to divert, dealing with escaped prisoners and malfunctioning systems. They were 3 levels from the comm hub when they ran into the first real resistance. A squad of elite Centaurian guards, their armor-bearing high command insignias, blocked their path. Commander Nimra, their leader called out, weapon raised. By order of Admiral Thorax, stand down and surrender the human prisoner. Vex stepped forward, her scales dark with anger. I've seen the truth, Captain. New Venus, the planned attacks, all of it. Stand aside. The truth? The captain laughed. The truth is what High Command says it is. That's how order is maintained. Order maintained through lies isn't order, Marcus said quietly. It's tyranny. What happened next was a blur of motion. Vex and Xena moved in perfect sync, their weapons finding gaps in the guard's armor. Marcus proved why humans were feared in close combat, his movements economical and devastating. When it was over, the path was clear. They'll have called for backup, Xena said, checking her weapon's charge. Vex nodded grimly. Then we move faster. The truth doesn't care who tries to stop it. Once it starts to spread, not even High Command can contain it. As they raced toward the comm hub, Marcus glanced at Vex. You know, when you first locked me up, I never thought I'd end up trying to save the galaxy with a Centaurian warden. When I first locked you up, Vex replied, I never thought I'd end up believing in a human's innocence. Life is full of surprises. Above them, Admiral Thorax's flagship moved into position, its weapons charging. The real battle was about to begin, and the fate of millions hung in the balance. But for the first time since she'd discovered the truth, Vex felt something she hadn't expected: hope. The communication hub of Helios 7 was a fortress within a fortress, its quantum transmitters capable of broadcasting across thousands of light-years. As Vex, Marcus, and Xena approached the reinforced doors, the station shuddered under another barrage from Thorax's fleet. Status report, Vex commanded, her scales shifting to match the shadows as they took cover. Xena consulted her datapad, her young face illuminated by its glow. 5 capital ships in attack formation. They're targeting the station's life support systems. She looked up, scales pale with shock. Commander, they're going to kill everyone aboard to keep this quiet. Thorax always was thorough, Vex muttered. She turned to Marcus. Can you get us inside? He was already working on the door's control panel, his fingers moving with practiced precision. Their encryption is growing more sophisticated. They're learning from every system I crack. A spark, a hiss, and the panel went dark. But not fast enough. The massive doors slid open, revealing the circular chamber beyond. Banks of computers lined the walls, their displays showing the positions of Thorax's ships and the status of the station's failing systems. At the center stood the quantum transmitter array, its crystalline structure pulsing with barely contained energy. They were halfway to the main console when the air shimmed, and a hologram of Admiral Thorax materialized before them, his massive form towering over the room. Commander Nimra, his voice dripped with false concern. What would your father say, seeing his daughter commit treason? He died defending our people from human aggression. Vex's scales flared red with rage. My father died believing in a lie you created. How many other loyal soldiers have you sacrificed to maintain your war? Sacrifices are necessary for the greater good, Thorax replied. The people need an enemy to unite against. Humans proved convenient. Marcus stepped forward, his face hard. We're not your convenient scapegoat anymore. The truth comes out today. Thorax's mandibles clicked in amusement. Does it? Look around you, human. My ships surround this station. My troops are breaking through your barricades. And in 5 minutes, the reactor core will go critical. Dead heroes tell no tales. The hologram flickered out just as explosion rocked the chamber. Elite Centaurian troops poured through multiple entrances, their weapons charged. Leading them was Commander Pyrax, Thorax's personal enforcer, his cybernetic enhancements gleaming. Xena, the transmitter. Vex shouted, diving for cover as energy bolts scorched the air. Marcus and I will hold them off. What followed was chaos. Vex moved like a warrior possessed, her years of combat training showing in every fluid motion. Marcus fought beside her, their styles complementing each other perfectly, her power and precision matching his speed and adaptability. Pyrax charged through the firefight, his cybernetic limbs giving him inhuman speed. You always were soft, Nimra, he growled, engaging her in close combat. Too many questions, too much doubt. Better doubt than blind obedience, she spat back, matching him blow for blow. Her scales shifted rapidly, making her a harder target to track. At the transmitter, Xena worked frantically, uploading the evidence they'd gathered. A stray shot caught her in the shoulder, but she didn't falter. 60 seconds to broadcast, she called out. Marcus found himself surrounded by 3 elite guards. Any time now, he grunted, ducking under a swing that would have taken his head off. I don't think they're interested in taking prisoners anymore. The station's AI announced reactor critical warnings as Pyrax knocked Vex to the ground, his augmented fist raised for a killing blow. "For what it's worth," he said, "I always respected you." A shot rang out, but not from any of the combatants. Officer Crix, Vex's old mentor and the station's head of security, stood in the doorway with his weapon raised. Pyrax fell, a smoking hole in his chest. "Still watching out for my favorite student," Crix said, his aged scales gleaming as he provided covering fire. "Though you might have warned me about your change of heart." "Broadcast initiating," Xena announced triumphantly. The quantum transmitter hummed to life, its crystals blazing with energy. On screens throughout the chamber, across the station, and on thousands of worlds, the truth began to play. Evidence of the false flag attacks, the planned destruction of innocent colonies, the carefully orchestrated deception that had driven two species to war. "No!" Pyrax roared, dragging himself toward a console. "Override code Theta-9-. Marcus kicked the enforcer's hand away. "I think you've given enough orders." The station rocked with another impact, but this one was different. Through the chamber's viewports, they could see new ships arriving, not Centaurian, but a mixed fleet of human and alien vessels. "The independent worlds," Vex breathed. "They received the transmission. And they're not the only ones," Crix added, checking a terminal. "Civilian ships from dozens of species are broadcasting the evidence. Thorax can't suppress them all." But their victory was far from assured. The reactor was still critical, and Thorax's fleet showed no signs of standing down. As if reading her thoughts, Marcus joined Vex at the viewport. "We've thrown the first punch," he said quietly. "But the real fight's just starting." Vex nodded, watching as more ships arrived, choosing sides in what would become either a massacre or a revolution. "Then we better make it count." The fate of two species, and perhaps the entire galaxy, hung in the balance. But as Vex looked at her unlikely allies, a human prisoner who'd shown her the truth, a young officer who chose principle over protocol, and an old mentor who proved loyalty meant more than blindly following orders, she knew which side of history she wanted to be on. The question was, would they live long enough to see it? Helios 7's reactor core pulsed an angry red as Vex, Marcus, Xena, and Crix raced through its winding corridors. Emergency lighting cast long shadows as warning klaxons screamed their final countdown. 5 minutes until core breach, the station's AI announced with eerie calm. "All personnel, please proceed to evacuation points." "Please tell me someone here knows how to stop a reactor meltdown," Marcus said, vaulting over a fallen security barrier. Crix's aged scales shimmered with grim determination. "The main engineering controls are locked down. Thorax's override codes saw to that. But there's another way." He shared a meaningful look with Vex. "Protocol 0. Vex's scales darkened. "That's suicide, old friend." "What's Protocol 0? Marcus asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer wouldn't be good. "A manual shutdown sequence," Xena explained, her voice tight. "It requires direct interface with the core. The radiation exposure would be fatal." Before anyone could respond, the corridor ahead exploded in a hail of weapons fire. Admiral Thorax himself stepped through the smoke, his ceremonial armor scarred but intact. Behind him, a squad of elite guards took position. "I must admit, Commander Nimra, you've exceeded expectations," Thorax said, his voice carrying that same false warmth. "Turning my own station against me, broadcasting our secrets to the sector. Impressive." His mandibles clicked. "Futile, but impressive." "It's over, Thorax," Vex snarled. "The truth is out. Every species in the galaxy knows what you did." "The truth?" Thorax laughed, the sound like grinding metal. "I've spent decades building this narrative. Do you think one data breach will undo everything?" There will be denials, investigations, committees, years of bureaucracy. More than enough time to complete our final solution. Marcus stepped forward, his eyes hard. The colonies you're planning to destroy. That's what this reactor meltdown is really about, destroying the evidence before anyone can stop you. Clever human, Thorax nodded. The destruction of Helios 7 will be blamed on human terrorists. The perfect justification for our final offensive. He raised his weapon. Now, shall we end this farce? What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. Crix moved with speed that belied his age, charging forward as Thorax opened fire. The old security chief's body took the hits meant for Vex, but his momentum carried him into the Admiral, sending them both crashing into the guards. Go! Crix shouted, his scales already growing pale. Complete Protocol 0. It's been an honor, student of mine. Vex wanted to stay, to save her mentor, but she knew what had to be done. This way, she called to the others, leading them down a maintenance shaft as the sounds of battle erupted behind them. The reactor core chamber was a cathedral of twisted metal and pulsing energy. Emergency force field flickered, barely containing the radiation already leaking from the destabilizing core. The manual controls are there, Vex pointed to a console near the core itself. But the radiation levels. We'll kill anyone who gets close enough, Marcus finished. He checked the readings on a nearby display. Unless. No, Vex said firmly, realizing what he was thinking. You've already been falsely condemned once. I won't let you sacrifice yourself. Marcus smiled, that same tired smile she'd seen when he first arrived. Who said anything about sacrifice? He pulled up his sleeve, revealing a series of small scars. 3 years in prison gave me time to prepare. Radiation-resistant nanites, courtesy of some sympathetic guards who questioned the official story. They won't last long, but they'll give me a chance. Before Vex could argue, the chamber shook violently. Through the viewport, they could see Thorax's flagship positioning for a killing blow. 2 minutes to core breach, the AI reminded them helpfully. Marcus turned to Vex and Xena. Get to the command center. The fleet defending the station will need guidance. And, someone needs to tell our story. The real story. Vex caught his arm. Why didn't you tell me about the nanites sooner? Would you have believed me? He grinned. Besides, I needed to be sure you were really on the side of truth first. Another impact rocked the station. 1 minute to core breach. Go, Marcus said softly. Change the future. Vex's scales shifted through a rainbow of emotions before settling on a deep, determined blue. Survive this, human. That's an order. As Vex and Xena raced for the command center, Marcus approached the core. The radiation warnings screamed as he pushed through the failing containment field, each step harder than the last. The nanites in his blood fought against the deadly energies trying to tear him apart. In the command center, Vex took control of the station's defenses. The independent fleet was holding its own against Thorax's forces, but time was running out. 30 seconds to core breach. Vex watched the reactor readings, her heart pounding. Come on, Marcus, she whispered. Through the static of failing communications, a voice crackled, Protocol 0 initiated. Core stabilization in progress. The reactor's angry red glow began to fade, replaced by a steady blue pulse. Around the station, systems began coming back online. Core stabilized, the AI announced. Radiation levels decreasing. But there was no time to celebrate. Thorax's flagship was making its final approach, weapons charged for a killing blow. That's when space itself seemed to tear open. Through massive quantum rifts, ships began emerging, not just human vessels, but craft from every species that had received their broadcast. The combined fleet dwarfed Thorax's forces. "This is Admiral Chen of the Earth Defense Force," a new voice announced on all channels. "Admiral Thorax, your deception ends today. Stand down your forces or be destroyed." On the main viewer, Vex watched as Thorax's fleet, faced with overwhelming odds, began powering down their weapons. "Commander," Xena called out, her scales bright with excitement. "Life signs detected in the reactor chamber. He's alive." Hours later, as medical teams treated the wounded and security forces took the conspirators into custody, Vex stood in her office, watching the combined fleet through her viewport. Marcus, looking exhausted but very much alive, joined her. "So," he said, "what happens now?" Vex turned to face him. "Now we rebuild. Not just structures, but trust. It won't be easy." "Nothing worth doing ever is," he replied. "But at least we're not doing it alone anymore." Outside, ships from dozens of species worked together, helping to repair the damaged station. It was a small thing, perhaps, but it represented something greater, the first step toward a future built on truth rather than fear. "You know," Vex said thoughtfully, "we still never figured out who helped you get those nanites." Marcus smiled mysteriously. "Maybe some stories are better left as mysteries. Keeps things interesting." As they stood there, watching the dawn of a new era, Vex realized that sometimes the greatest victories come not from defeating monsters, but from refusing to become them. The real challenge wasn't surviving the day, it was building a tomorrow worth fighting for. And for the first time in her life, she was ready to face that challenge head-on, with allies she never expected to find, and hope for a future she never dared to imagine.